everybody. Good morning. I think it's still morning a little bit anyway. I had a busy day today. I was doing a lot of things, so I'm getting started a little later than usual. But I'm hoping that you're still with us, and we're going to go on to Ruth 2 today. So, Ruth 2 is interesting. There's a lot of things in here to think about, a lot of things to consider, and we're going to be stopping and starting a little bit, and I'm going to give you some other scripture verses that you might want to jot down if you have a pencil. So, let's start with the first sentence of Ruth 2. Remember, Naomi and Ruth have just gotten to Bethlehem from Moab. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, the chapter starts out with that, but it has nothing to do with what we've previously talked about, and it's a little jarring at first, and then you realize this is a clue. You have to think of this like all these things of God's plan coming into play at the same time. So this man is not related to Naomi except by marriage, which is very important. This is not her kinsman, it is her husband's kinsman. He comes from the same clan of Elimelech. And remember, we've been talking about how important it is to have a man protect the family and be the name of the family. In fact, there were times that they were asked to marry their brothers' wives or produce children. The biggest thing was to have children in the line of that person. So if your brother died, you took his wife and fathered a child by her so that your brother's name could continue. So the men are the most important at this point in terms of name and property and so on. So he is from the same clan as Naomi's former husband Elimelech, who died. This guy's name is Boaz, and they say he's a man of standing. So that means, I guess, he had some money. Maybe he had some prestige in the community or property that he owns. We know he is a farmer because later on we meet him that way, that he owns property. So this is a man who has a little bit of money and a little bit of prestige in the community. And he's a man of good standing also could mean that he has pretty good reputation. People like him and know him to be a good, honest man. So that's how the chapter starts, and then they continue in verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." So first of all, let's go back to Ruth the Moabite. Remember I said she's always referred to as Ruth the Moabite. And I was doing some research on this about why that would have been such a slur in a way. It was a racial slur to keep calling her Ruth the Moabite and keep pointing out that she was a Moabitess. So one of the things that I found comes from Genesis 19. And this is Genesis 19 verses 31 to 37. And I'm going to give you a little background on this. You probably all remember Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, Abraham wanted God to please save his nephew Lot, who was living in Sodom, because God was going to destroy Sodom. So at that point, he allows Lot to escape with his wife and his two daughters. Lot's wife, however, is still thinking about Sodom, and she turns around, and when she turns around, she's turned to a pillar of salt. The Lord has instructed them, don't even turn around, don't look. She looks, she turns to a pillar of salt. So now there's just Lot and his two daughters. And they hide up in the mountains, and they live in a cave. And while they're there, these girls are getting pretty frisky because they got no men around them at all. And they come up with this horrible plan. In verse 19, or in verse 31, they say, one day the older daughter said to her sister, "There's no men left anywhere in this entire area. We can't get married like everyone else, and our father will soon be too old to have children. Come on, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him, and that way we will preserve our family line through our father." So these girls wanted to have children, and they wanted to have a family line, and so they decided that incest was their answer. So they got their father drunk, and each of them went in and had sex with him. And if you scroll down to verse 36, as a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation known as the Moabites. Now, the word Moab is a Hebrew term that sounds like the word from father. So when you call somebody a Moabitess, you're basically telling the fact that she came from incest, her background, her culture. It was very much of an outsider to be thought of as a Moabite. They were considered to be a low class kind of area, you know? And it's like any racial slur or any slur of any kind. It labels the person. So she was labeled as coming from a culture that was originally part of incest. That would have been bad. You know, it would not have been great to come into Bethlehem and be the only Moabitess around who could be called Ruth the Moabite. Even David later on, when he is in his victories, he has a victory over Moab. At one point they go to war, and he says, but Moab is my wash basin. So he kind of likens Moab to the area where if you washed your feet with a pitcher of water, and the water falls down, it's like what's left in the wash basin after you washed your feet. So the people did not think highly of Moab, and Ruth would have been that kind of a foreigner and an outsider. So here she is with Naomi. They have no man to protect them. So she says to Naomi, maybe I could go get a job. That's what she wants to do, is go get a job. And she says, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I found favor. Picking up the leftover grain, some translations use the word gleaning, Gleaning, gleaning. Gleaning was really God's welfare system. If you look in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you will find many ways that God mentions this and instructs the people to do this. For example, in Deuteronomy 24:19 to 22, he says, when you're harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt. So God is telling them here that he wants them to leave some food for the people who don't have anybody to protect them, and to remember what it was like to be a slave in Egypt and not to have anybody to protect you. In Leviticus, he says a similar thing. This is Leviticus 19, verses 9 to 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over a vineyard a second time, or pick up grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So the gleanings were the leftovers, what was left over after the harvest was done. And the poor people, the fatherless, the widows, and the foreigners, like Ruth the Moabitess, would come in and pick up these extra leftovers, and that's what they could live on. So when I think of leftovers, it reminds me of my mother, because whenever I used to go out to lunch with her, I used to love to order shepherd's pie. And every time I would order shepherd's pie, she would kind of, stick up her nose. And I said to her, why don't you like shepherd's pie? Well, shepherd's pie was what her mother made during the Depression with all the leftovers. That was a leftover thing. It wasn't what, rich people ate. It was what poor people ate. So the gleanings, having to live on the gleanings would have been very humbling. It would have been like that. It would have been like it was in the Depression, where you're just finding little things that you can get by on. You're reusing your clothing and all that kind of stuff. It was very symbolic of being completely defenseless and totally dependent on other people's generosity just to survive. And that's very, very difficult for people. It really is. But in this case, Ruth she's not objecting to it. She's not saying, I'm too great to do this. She's saying, let me humble myself. Let me go and get the leftovers, and we'll live on the leftovers. I think we can do that. I think I can help out that way. And she's hoping that if she does that, she'll find favor with somebody who will allow her to take these gleanings and take them home. So it's no accident that this is happening. It's not coincidence that she has decided to do this, and it's not coincidence that she is going to end up being where Boaz is, who we've already met Boaz, and obviously he's a landowner, so it's not going to be coincidence that this happens. It's all part of a miraculous plan. So we're going to be working our way through Ruth 2 in the next few days, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.